Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to speak at such a forum. This is indeed a very interesting conference, providing us a view on how things could work in our country. And the question now is how to finance the state or the government. And my answer, being representative of a central bank, so definitely not through the monetary policy. So unfortunately, this was a principle embraced by the ECB, and were forced to adopt it as well. But the situation changed in between, and the European Central Bank crossed the so-called two red lines, and it started to do some things which were hard to imagine in the past. So it started to accept speculative bonds, even though it claimed that this would never happen, and started to buy the state bonds, the government bonds. Well, we now see that the position of even the ECB is not that strong if politicians interfere. So some measures were adopted to avoid inflation pressures once the banks sell their state bonds. I don't think the weak euro is a problem. Investors started or no longer trust the euro for obvious reasons. The euro area, it's become obvious that the euro area was made for the good times, and now, the mechanisms to fight against the bad times were missing. So we started to implement some fast measures. So we now lead a debate what should be done. Germany, for example, is proposing a bill that would force the governments to have balanced budget. So we could also expect a tightening of fiscal policies of individual countries. There will be some mechanisms to harmonize those fiscal policies, and the objective of all these measures is to stabilize the euro. So, but this will be the topic of political discussions, and let's wait for the outcome. And now the current crisis of the insolvency. So it's tried. There are attempts to resolve it through a supply of liquidity, but it's not addressing the causes, particularly in Greece. We'll wait whether this is the end of the European welfare system under globalization pressures. But I think this is the direction. That's briefly on the monetary policy. Next thing is elections. And all Visegrad 4 countries will have elections. It's a time of great promises. Democracy is a good thing, but the current situation also reveals its weaknesses, because we see that voters could be bought by politicians. For example, some small gifts like the 13th pension payment, or cancelling of payments to doctor. Unfortunately, politicians are covered or not courageous enough to introduce far-reaching reforms in their limited time of office. Courageous reforms were then punished, in fact, by voters. Let's remember the situation in Slovakia or in the Czech Republic. The only solution to this situation in a democracy is limiting the power of the government to the maximum extent possible, and perhaps this will lead to more rational policies, but this is really hypothetical, whether we should, whether the even electorate right is really the best choice, but these are debates which are not agenda today yet. Next issue is the sustainability of budgets, and the crisis shown us that this deficit-producing policy is not sustainable. So what's now under discussion is introducing caps on public expenditure and public debts, and that will be a short-term solution. The deficits or surplus that's generated should first of all be used to reduce the amount of debt. As to Slovakia, so there are two sources or two solutions how to reduce expenditure. First of all, we know that about 40% of tax revenues actually 40% of expenditure is made through the process of public procurement. So if the public procurement process was really efficient, so I think we could cut this figure, and then we should also increase the efficiency of public administration, like e-government, less institutions than we have today, and of course much more transparency. These are painless measures for a great majority of the population, which could bring us quite huge savings. But changes to the policies will be needed to that view. The pension policy, also the health sector is not working efficiently, so the money is disappearing there. The healthcare, the level of healthcare is not really the best. Actually, it's at the tail even within the V4 countries. Then also problems in the education sector, which would be in need of higher efficiency and less expenditure. So these were the two factors or two causes or two areas to concentrate on to reduce public expenditure. When speaking about savings in budgets and budgetary cuts, it's often said that we should not limit economic growth, and because it goes hand in hand with productivity of labor, and the measures which I mentioned should not undermine economic growth. But in Slovakia we have huge reserves, or there is a way to improve. Labor markets, despite past reforms, are quite rigid, inflexible. What I think is a great problem is the process of hiring people and then dismissing people, and it's also some far-reaching changes would also be required to the system of taxation and particular payroll taxes. And what could be helpful in that respect is introduction of e-government. We should also improve our local and regional governments. The self-governments are receiving taxes. Their main revenues are the taxes, an allocation of taxes from the central government, and it seems as though they would not ask for anything from the people, because the current local taxes, like real property tax, those taxes are quite low, so there is no direct link between those taxes and the activities of the self-governments. And so, they're not kind of liable to the citizens for how they manage their assets and how they spend the tax revenues. Well, the next issue is enforcement of the law. So it's indeed a huge issue, and in the past 4 years, the situation has not improved at all. Then the support to post-secondary schools and universities, support to research and development, I agree to that. That's a way for Slovakia, but do we have enough experts for that? And with the money that is given to the universities now, so is it spent efficiently? And actually now it's the even distribution, allocation of money to universities. So even the bad universities get the same portion of the money as really the best universities. So there is low differentiation. So, and we have few capacities. Few experts which are really renowned in the world and which are really capable of implementing the change. And well, the next thing is privatization. That's also a kind of way how to reduce public debt. Last thing I wanted to say, in turbulent times, orientation is very important, but this is not true in Slovakia, perhaps, because tax revenues at the end of April was reached only 86% of what was planned, with the largest gaps produced by the income tax, and also a slight decrease in value-added tax. The difference is about 400 million euros for 1/3 of the year, so that means that for the entire year this would be a shortfall of 1.2 billion euros, which is about 8% of GDP, and actually by this figure the current public deficit should be increased, but we do not have any projections from the Ministry of Finance or the central bank. Perhaps they expect some high revenues in the second half of the year, but we do not know the plans, so we want to stay or stick to the 5.5% public deficit. Will we cut expenditure? If so, what expenditure will be cut? So we do not know. Nobody is saying anything, and that's quite interesting considering the current situation. And that was actually my closing remarks. So thank you for your attention.